Benvenuti, bentornati. It's time to discuss the Serie A fixtures. Here we go. And we're starting with the Sunday night kickoff. Bologna 1, Juve 1. Goals from Kefram Turam and Freuler. Well, all the talk here, Adam, has been about the referee, really. There's been a lot of discussion about are referees in Italy the worst? Bologna should feel quite hard done by. Talk us through where all these moanings have come from.
There was a few, it's fair to say, contentious decisions that were made. I don't know if it's necessarily, for me, the referee. I think it was a combination of VAR kind of with the offside rules. And it's not factually incorrect that they were offsides, if that makes sense. But it is, we're getting to a point where it's fingernails now kind of defining if a player is offside. And it seems to be a joke the more that I see it. It's frustrating, and these aren't teams that I care about, but I'd be very frustrated if I see it against me. And I think this was one of the games that actually I think saved the weekend, because actually it was quite action packed. I think my reflection of the game was that I feel Bologna will feel hard done by, because there were certain decisions that went against them. There was one incident, for example, where there was coming together, and I can't remember, I think it was Vega who kind of sticks out his hand behind him and touches the ball out of the direction of Castro. And you're thinking, surely the referee can see that. But nonetheless, I think Bologna were fully deserving of getting a point in this game. But equally, Juventus probably should have killed the game in the first half. They had the opportunities. And I think it's very much a reflection of Juventus needing to get through these next two fixtures, the one against Bologna and the next one coming up against Lazio. And then it might be an easier kind of pathway to maybe securing fourth spot. But they didn't make it easy for themselves. The style of football in the second half was very much holding on to what they had in terms of a slender lead. And as soon as the equaliser was scored by Freuler, we actually saw a really end-to-end kind of game. Juventus really, I feel from my point anyway, second half, I didn't feel they had enough kind of threat in front of goal. It was much more Bologna. But Bologna will kind of kick themselves for not being maybe more clinical in front of goal when they had the opportunities. They kind of fluffed their lines, snatched at shots. And that ultimately was why we saw a draw on the night. But actually, it was really good value in terms of entertainment for the neutral perspective. And probably kind of allude to the fact why Bologna might struggle to get anywhere into that top six mix now, because I feel like that's what they're lacking, is just that clinical striker for them. But yeah, nothing but plaudits for Italiano and the way that approached it in that second half, because there's definitely a lot more intent in that second half. But if we allude to the first half, Kefram Turam even, his goal was a mistake by Skorupski. If Skorupski doesn't make that error in terms of trying to save that, maybe we're talking about a tighter game, and maybe also another game where Juventus struggle, because under this Tudor regime, it's fair to say it hasn't been plain sailing. I don't know necessarily if he's going to make a call out for his kind of opportunity to land this job. I think that's the key question mark at this stage, and it feels like there's a lot of rumours still about who's going to potentially be the man at the helm at the end of the season. But yeah, I think Bologna did deserve a point at the end of it, Rory.
Well, poor Igor Tudor, he can't get beyond the caretaker role, really. No one really he wants to take him on a longer-term basis. But, Andrea, if we talk about Juve, there has been a bit of would you say there's been an upturn? The style of football has definitely changed, but would you say there's been enough of an upturn to warrant the decision that they made to replace Motta and bring in Tudor? Because they're still basically where they were before.
At this moment in time, no. I just think that the style of play is not consistent enough. And I think in that game, for example, I was quite disappointed with Juventus in terms that they almost gave possession to Bologna and let Bologna have the ball and kind of get back into the game. Because when they were on top, yes, they missed the chances, but you just needed that same energy to go in again after the second half. And they kind of just tried to hold on. And it was kind of like a mixture of like, we're going to play good football, but we're also going to drop back. And I think neither was really practical in this match. And I think overall in 90 minutes in every game he's done so far, there's been periods where Juventus have been outplayed or they've made too many mistakes and it looks quite sloppy. So for me, I just think it's still quite a raw job in terms to take in terms of trying to show yourself anyway as it is. So I think for his sake, it's probably going to be difficult because these results are probably going to still continue to the end of the season, just purely because this team has been used to it this season and the way Tudor sets up. I think it only just kind of gets it more, this type of stuff more happens. So it's one of those things, but I think certainly for Juventus' sake, they wanted to go into this project with Motta. I'd just be very surprised if they'll set with Tudor when you could just bring back Allegri, who's similar style and he could do it a lot better and actually get the results. But it's the fact. Allegri can do it. That's the point. So it wouldn't make sense to keep Tudor if Allegri's there.
Yeah, well, Adam, this is kind of the elephant in the room, isn't it? It seems to have been confirmed that Tudor won't be taken over next year, but the man that is seemingly sneaking his way closer and closer to Turin is also sneaking his way closer and closer to the Scudetto. It's going to be, if Conte leaves Napoli to go straight for Juve, Napoli would have had 2 Scudetti ruined basically straight away by the aftermath afterwards, which is pretty rough on the fans. But are you surprised by the decision from Conte, or the expected decision from Conte? Obviously, it's not confirmed yet, but I can't help but feel I'm a little bit surprised by it, honestly.
I'm not totally surprised because of the comments that Conte has been alluding to in the press about how his time at Napoli is ending at the moment. I won't kind of spare the thoughts of what he said graphically to our listenership, but essentially kind of alluded to the fact that he's been hamstrung by the transfer policy in much more like descriptive term, it's fair to say. And I think that relationship with him and De Laurentiis was never going to be straightforward. It was always going to be one that was going to be played by the animatronics, let's say, of what they say to each other in public, I feel. And ultimately, look, he's delivered wherever he's gone to, bar Tottenham. So I feel like that probably says a lot about Conte. But the fact that he's managed to go to, for example, Inter, Juventus' rivals, and win a Scudetto, and he's doing the same potentially with Napoli, says a lot about his mentality. And I think that is what Juventus are striving for, is just someone that's got the mentality to drive, a winning kind of formula for the Juventus. And I feel, Juventus can't really go back to Allegri because they pretty much drove him out of that club. So whilst there probably still is a distinct possibility that he could come back, I feel it would look bad on the current boards. So therefore, by bringing in someone like Antonio Conte, who is a legend from a playing days perspective, I think that will at least buy the board some time with the fan base, right? And so we know Antonio Conte can work miracles with a squad that might not have a lot of money spent on it. We saw what he did at a national level with Italy as well, for example, where the players weren't maybe at the levels or potentially at the true capability of what the nation could achieve at that very moment. But you feel with Juventus, there's a little bit more that he can work with, more that he could mould with. And if we're alluding in terms of style, it's not too dissimilar with Tudor, but I think he will get them to be a bit more clinical in front of goal, a bit more clinical in defensive terms, and potentially making sure that they're always in the top 4 is the key for Juventus, is to ensure that they're playing in Champions League. And that is ultimately what Juventus fans crave, right?
Absolutely. But my issue is, Juve aren't going to give him money to spend. Juve don't have any money. Like, he's going to go, like, Napoli looks like probably going to win the Scudetto, right? They're going to go into the Champions League next year. They're going to have, I would argue, possibly a bit more money. They're going to sell Osimhen. They're going to get some money there. There's a few sales that they can still make where they can gather a bit of funds. I feel like if his whole thing with Conte is how much money can I spend, which seems to be his modus operandi at every club, then you're going to have more fun at Napoli than you are at Juve. Juve are coming at this from a year without Europe, right? They're coming from it with just finishing 4th. You're going to sell Dusan Vlahovic, but you're going to be giving him away. You're not really going to be making money. You might get 30 for him if you're lucky, right? So I don't feel like he's going there with a load of backing behind him. Like, Juve are still paying off Ronaldo. So I think for me, it seems like a really strange decision. only beyond the fact that he's an ex-Juve player and his heart was always there, maybe, and that's where he wants to go. But I can't see from the Conte cycle that we see, I can see him going to Juve, and within 6 months, he's complaining about how he's not been able to buy the players he wanted because Juve don't have any money. So it's rinse and repeat. If I'm Conte, I'm thinking, well, you might as well stay at Napoli. You might as well build a bit of an empire there, do whatever, because you're going to have more funds at that club if that's what you want. Now, that being said, we also knew that him and De Laurentiis was going to shine brightly, not for a long time, right? They're two very big egos, and they were never really going to like each other. So we can't say we're surprised that it's kind of the relationship isn't particularly warm. But I'm still surprised that he would leave for Juventus immediately after 1 year. Like, Andrea, how do you see it? Do you see it as a surprising turn of events? Should Napoli fans be outside his house with pitchforks?
It's going to have to be the greatest escape to get out of there if no one notices him. But I think I think you talked about it really. Like, I think like both teams have the similar issues that they can't really perhaps afford to spend as much themselves anyway. So I don't think there's any much difference between the two. The only thing I can say would be that possibly that Conte will see that there's probably a bit more potential at Juventus in terms of the young players that they've got there that have shined this season. You've got players like Yildiz and players like that Napoli don't really have in that final third. And again, would they improve on the current final third? I'm not too sure. So I think he probably could see it as a project where he could definitely get the best out of these type of players. But I just think the only way is if De Laurentiis somehow convince Conte that there's some more signings we can bring in for you and just see how it goes. But yeah, I'm not too sure about it. And I think again, Conte ended on bad terms with Juventus when it did end. So just don't know if he'll get over it. He's a very stubborn guy, so I don't know if he will. It's a grudge he probably has for 7 years and still holds it. So I wouldn't be surprised. So that's the other thing I think you have to consider as well.
That is such a character. I feel like you could copy and paste that into every club he's left. He's basically like that gif of Homer Simpson literally burning the bridge as he leaves the power plant. Like, it's just Conte leaving his jobs. It's incredible, but fair play to Juve for trying to get him back. Like, they know what they want. But the problem is they're not going to have one game a week if everything goes to plan. They're not going to have one game a week, so he's going to have a job on his hands if he wants to challenge. For
he can fix that. He can fix that with a few results.
Yeah. Straight out of Europe, problem solved.
Who needs the Coppa Italia?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of the Coppa Italia, the other team are in the final, and Andrea, for Bologna, obviously they are kind of focusing on this European race. They are still firmly in it, but do you think their focus has slightly shifted to the Coppa Italia now? Is this their main focus in the season?
I think potentially, yeah, because when you look at it, they're probably now battling for a Europa League place, which the Coppa Italia would provide. I believe the Coppa Italia still provides that. So again, it's a chance to at least secure it that way. And I think certainly the Champions League kind of hopes probably faded a lot now, especially with that draw. So yeah, I think so. Again, it's a team that haven't won a trophy in a long time. So it'd be good to see when's the last time they won something, because it would have been a long time. But yeah, so I think for their sake, I think for Italiano's sake as well, because of the amount of finals he's lost, I think for his own personal sake to kind of, because he's, if we have to be realistic at the same time, that managers are judged obviously by what they do, but also what they win. And if he's still trophyless, it has a bad look on him. It will have a bad look until he wins something, you know? So, yeah, I think he really needs to get that over the line at some point.
So you're going to have to plug me into what you just said.
He just finished what he was saying, basically, about Italiano. Will be judged by results, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, I'll think about how I can pick up off that. Yeah, well, no, absolutely. But Adam, as we said, and you said in this match, they were lacking a little bit of cutting edge. They've got a few players who have got like 7 goals, 8 goals, 9 goals. They're kind of trying to spread the goals out, but they are absolutely missing that one bagsman that they had, right? Is this what would get them the extra step forward?
I think so. I think this has always been potentially something that's been aimed at Italiano, that he's never able to get the best out of his striking lineup. Castro, I would say, is an individual that has grown this season, maybe because he was in the shadows of the previous personnel at the club last year, and certainly one that has a bright future. I do genuinely see something in him. He's very tenacious, has a good shot on him. We haven't maybe seen those kind of wonder strikes that he kind of had at the beginning of the season as much this point of the season, but he's definitely a menace, it's fair to say, on defenders. And there was moments where you felt like, all he needs to do is have someone to feed off sometimes, or someone to play him into those positions. But arguably, that's where I think Bologna just fall short in terms of trying to maybe get themselves to the next level, is to have someone that can provide them with an outlet, someone maybe not necessarily as maybe a player with potential, but maybe even just an experienced head. That is what they're looking for. If you could have someone of the kind of ilk of Orsolini, but is a striker, predominantly a striker, I think that's all they need. They need someone that can just help them out. And I suppose that's a difficult one, because Bologna's kind of wage structure might restrict them in terms of the type of personnel that they can attract. But I'd love them to kind of try and get a striker of that caliber that could maybe help them propel them to the next level.
I'm going to chuck a mad one out. They approach Juve for Vlahovic on loan next season because no one else comes for him, and they try and get him. I'm going to manifest that into existence.
Not Simi from Salernitana, no.
Yeah, he's still scoring. You can't keep a good man down. He did score this weekend. I was just looking at Bologna's honours. The last thing they won was in 1998. They won the Intertoto Cup. Do you remember that? Fulham won that as well, I think, and Newcastle. And they did win the Anglo-Italian Cup in 1970. So they have a very glittered history, but their last major trophy, I would say, was the Coppa Italia in 73-74. So it would be a big, big deal for them to get that over the line. But let's leave that game there. Elsewhere in the top four race, Andrea, I'm going to go to you. I'm sorry, but Roma 1, Fiorentina 0. I quite enjoyed this game. I'm not sure if you would have enjoyed it as much, but I thought it was quite entertaining.
I don't know, maybe I'm watching different games. I thought it was terrible.
Oh, really?
I thought it was terrible. No, I'm trying to be neutral as possible. I just thought it was really boring. I think Roma just had a good game plan, and they just sat at it, and they just kind of frustrated Fiorentina when they tried to get back into the game. They got that goal and hanged on, really, but there's not much to say really about the game, other than the fact that Roma kind of, I think, were very clever in their approach. They kind of were very hostile to the Fiorentina players, and kind of like, and I think that affected a lot of players. In particular, Zaniolo was in a mess. In the end, got red card at full time. So I think, fortunately for Roma as well, a lot of Fiorentina players that came in for the kind of key players resting for Thursday. Then I think we're starting to see that perhaps these players aren't there yet, aren't at that level. Like, if you're going to compete in Europe and Serie A, you need to have those players that can come in and still do a good job. It might not be the same level, but just a good enough level to actually be able to do something. And I think the impact that some of these players didn't have, and then you had to sub on the first team players in the end, but again, it's too late at that point. And I think the biggest, obviously, thing for Fiorentina with that game was Moise Kean had like 3 chances where on his day, match fit, back on his form, he would have scored all 3. I'm not convinced I'm convinced he would have scored all 3. So I think, again, it just shows that they were lacking that kind of clinical edge that Keane's provided this season. So I can't complain about the performance too much. I just think Roma just done their job, got it done. And I think Fiorentina, unfortunately, just didn't have the players on the pitch to do anything, really. And then Keane, unfortunately, wasn't able to take the chances.
Yeah, well, you could see Kane getting really frustrated. Like, you're right, the Roma was super hostile. Like, Mancini spent the whole time winding him and Zaniolo up. That seemed like his only job on the pitch. They were very physical, very like get in their heads, don't let them settle. So as you said, I think Roma did really well, but I enjoyed that bit of needle in the game. There was like players properly trying to hurt each other. It felt quite like intense. I gotta say, I was impressed by Pongracic at the back. I thought he showed some real moments of quality on the ball. I thought it was good to see him doing well. I thought, I was really impressed with him, to be honest. But Adam, for Roma, Ranieri was throwing his hat in the ring for coach of the season if Roma make it into the top four. They've gained 45 points in 2025. I think this is 14 games unbeaten now. They've gone from 12th when he took over to 4th. They are winning a lot of games 1-0. They are kind of just getting the job done. But the job he has done with this squad and getting these performances out of the players that looked so lost at the beginning of the season, especially under Juric, it's an incredible job he's doing.
Absolutely incredible. I suppose stylistically, the football hasn't been particularly maybe pleasing on the eye because of the nature of how they go about their job. But what I wanted to actually allude to is one of the main points that I said was Villa had a fantastic game again, 15 clean sheets. And that's probably where I would kind of aim my kind of, praise towards Ranieri is the amount of these 1-0 kind of wins that Ranieri has accumulated with Roma is all down to that stability defensively. Because if you remember prior to that, under Ivan Juric and to a degree under Daniele De Rossi, who I think was a bit unfairly kind of tarnished towards the end of his time at Roma, was that defensively they were so weak, so placid, it was easy to score goals against them. And he completely has changed it, made it a bit more solidified, made them a bit more comfortable in the way that they've played it. And that confidence has, spread through. And on this, this particular game, we're talking about Moise Kean missing the chances. However, I think that also credit has to go to Villa because he made some big saves in this game. Not just from obviously Moise Kean. I seem to remember Mandragora also had an effort, which he kind of did on a half volley. Pongracic, which you mentioned, going on an amazing run, I seem to remember, and forcing a save out of Villa. So, this is down to that defensive solidity that I feel has really helped the rest of the team kind of operate in a way that they do their job. And a lot of credit goes to the likes of Manu Kone, who can then go into that final third and provide that kind of attacking outlet. Your man Shmorodov, again, feeding off that kind of ability. Dovbyk, I feel, has been elevated since he's been able to maybe be a bit more of his type of personnel as a striker. And, he's able to feed off the other players as well a bit more comfortably than he did at the beginning of the season. So I think a lot of credit has to go to Ranieri for what he's been able to do, which is allow the players to play their natural game, maybe get the best out of these players, but also propel them in such a way that is, we're talking about Roma being in the top four. I don't think any three of us had kind of expected that when it looked like they were closer to relegation battle.
Yeah, it's incredible. And Dovbyk is a really interesting point because he's now, if you just said to me 5 games in, that he would be linked to Inter by the end of the season because he's done so well, I would not believe you. I think his turnaround in form and his turnaround in how this team, you're right, the whole time with De Rossi and Juric, we were like, we know how to use him that way. And that's what Ranieri has done. And he has picked up these goals and he has hit this form and he is looking dangerous. And now Inter are like, I think if Inter just took him off Roma, I think that would be a very clever signing. That would be a very, you're taking potentially one of the better strikers in this league for the next couple of years. You're just going, yep, he's ours. We're taking him. I think it would be a very clever signing, but his turnaround in form has been fantastic. Obviously, Kone was fantastic again, but he seems to be fantastic every game. I'm yet to see him really play that badly. And there was a player who came off the bench. He's on loan from Leipzig, Duath. I wasn't even aware that he was at Roma. He came on and showed a few moments of quality. I still think he needs to learn to pass the ball a little bit quicker, but I was really impressed when he came onto the pitch. He held on to it a bit too long, but he had a few lively moments. I thought he was fantastic. But yeah, Andrea Svilar is probably going to be our goalkeeper of the season. Do you think he'll get goalkeeper of the season? He's been fantastic.
You can't do
I know you want to say De Gea.
No, I think for especially this latter part of the season, he's definitely been the standout one. I don't think anyone comes close to him. The turn of the year, no one's gone close to him, 100%. So I think he will do.
Well, I wanted to caveat that with, is it recency bias? Because De Gea possibly has been the signing of the season as well. He's been unbelievable for Fiorentina on a free. But yeah, a big win for Roma that does in fact bring them in. Well, they're 5th now, level on points with Lazio and Juventus, 4th, 5th and 6th, all joint on points. And that is because Lazio also won this weekend. They won away 1-0 at Empoli. I was probably the only poor bugger who sat and watched this game. But it actually wasn't that bad. Sunday midday games is very convenient for me to watch, so I do often sit and watch them. Empoli weren't actually that bad. I feel like they're not terrible. They just can't win games. Like, they're not getting pumped. They're just the second they concede, they're fucked. And there was 2 red cards in this game. There was a lot going on. It was all quite heated. Guendouzi was fantastic again. Just how key he is to this team, just constantly getting the team forward. But it was all decided by a goal in the first minute, and then nothing else really happened. But Adam, again, Boulaye Dia, big moment for Lazio. It's great for them to have him back at this time of the season. He's missed a bit of football, but he came up with a big moment and got them still within the European race post disappointment in Bodo Glimt.
Yeah, sure. I think he adds that bit of quality that they've been lacking in the last few weeks. But you're right to allude to the fact that Empoli weren't necessarily terrible, but if there's a goal to typify their season, it's that one where it's a simple mistake. It's a ball over the top, defenders looking gormlessly, and then they leave like a quality player to kind of finish it off. And then, all of their efforts for the rest of the game kind of goes in vain. They did have opportunities in this game, possibly after they had the sending off of Colombo as well, to be fair, in this particular match. They did give it a go, but by that point it was too late because Lazio kind of absorbed it to the best of abilities. They did have the ball in the back of the net. But for me, this is the problem that we've always said with Empoli. It feels like they need to get relegated just to re-stabilize themselves and maybe kind of rethink their philosophy, because they seem to be always a club that's clasping onto that kind of Serie A status rather than trying to build a squad that can maybe compete in this league. That's always been my perception of Empoli in the last few seasons, is that never can they hold on to talents and they eventually get sold on. I seem to remember there was a phase where they would bring on players on loan to like build their time in Serie A, and then they would move on to having better careers with their parent clubs. But now you kind of felt maybe with Roberto De Versa at the beginning of the season, it was going to change slightly. They had that kind of form that kept them in the top half of the table, and then suddenly their slump of form has dragged them into the relegation battle, and it just doesn't feel like right now that they've got enough quality to pull themselves out. I think a few weeks ago, I seem to remember Kuname having great chances against the likes of Venezia as well as Como. And they're the kind of opportunities that you need Empoli to take, but they didn't. So that summarizes Empoli for me. As for Lazio, much needed win, gives them a bit of confidence and gives them a bit of hope and fight for this tight top 4 kind of battle, I would say. But I feel like this stage, maybe it's going to elude them by the wayside, because I just feel like the likes of Roma and potentially Juventus just have a little bit more about them at this stage. But did you think anything about this Lazio side that convinces you that they've got enough? If we think about the next game, they've got Juventus. That's a massive game that they have to potentially win, right?
I do feel like with Lazio, I never know what team's going to turn up, which is half the issue. Sometimes they're just absolutely terrible, but then in big games, they tend to turn up and they'll beat the big sides. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did Juve 1-0 and you'd be like another Barone masterclass, if you know what I mean. Like, I can never know what to expect from them. And I think this is what, as you said, is ultimately going to cost them. Before we quickly go through the fixtures and talk about who we're going to talk about in the top 4, I very quickly want to say, if Empoli do go down, the players that will not be there next year, Vasquez in goal is far too good for Serie B. Yeah. He will be gone. Fazzini will absolutely be gone. And there's another young midfielder they started in this game, Mario Nucci. He's only 20. He had an outstanding game as well. And I think this is part of the issue with Empoli, is that they do play a lot of these young players, which is fantastic for the club. But when the older players are players like, and I love him, he's in my Fantacalcio, but players like Ghiazzi, who are fine jobbing players, but they can't hit a barn door, you need that player up front who's just going to get that one goal or whatever, and they just do not have it. But they have got a lot of exciting young players there. So I think it'll be fun in Serie B for them if they don't manage to stay up. But let's go through the fixtures and let's talk about it. So Lazio, in their last 3 fixtures, They have
hard.
Juve at home, as you alluded to, Inter away, and then Lecce at home. Now, Lecce will probably be fighting for survival in that game, so that is not a given. Roma have Atalanta away, a resurgent, they played Monza. Atalanta away, they have Milan at home, and then they have Torino away. Torino with nothing to play for, because it's Torino, they never have anything to play for. And Juve will be playing Lazio away, Udinese at home, and Venezia away on the last game, where, again, Venezia could be fighting for their lives. A slightly improving Venezia at this point, I think. Andrea, I'm going to go to you first. From those fixtures, who do you think will make it into the top four? Where do you think the deciding matches are?
I think it sounds like Juve will do it with the fixtures, to be honest. I think, to be honest, Juventus will feel more confident in terms of the other teams dropping points there. So they've just got to pick up. If they pick up next week, and Lazio and Roma could easily drop points next week, that's going to be massive. Then it would just mean one, a win and one draw would be enough, kind of thing. So I think next week could be really pivotal to determine already if Roma and Lazio drop points in those tough games they have. So I think next week could be the crucial weekend, really, for Juventus to kind of secure that, because then they've got that. Did you say Venezia home, the second last game, I think you said?
Venezia away, their last game, Juve.
Oh, the last game, yeah. So again, I think they can go into that knowing that a draw potentially would be enough, and they could easily get that with already potentially relegated Venezia. So, yeah, I think Juventus got enough in them with those fixtures to go over the line, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that Venezia-Juve game could be a biscotto at the end where everyone just agrees we'll take it and leave. But Andrea, how do you Adam, even, how do you see this race going? Where do you think the deciding matches will be?
I still have a feeling Roma might sneak this. I still think they might be able to do a job. Atalanta, I think if they can draw, that would be a great result for them. And if we're saying potentially that Lazio and Juventus take points or someone drops points, then one of them will be out of the race potentially at that point. Because if you look at the next game for Lazio, they've got to go to Inter. Inter have got to get a big result there potentially. So that won't be a straightforward game. Roma do have, after the Atalanta game, Milan, who are currently beating Genoa now 2-1. A Milan side that, again, we just don't know what team decides to turn up. So again, that could be a difficult one. But yeah, I just feel that you look at the form, they know what they've got to do. Ranieri's kind of alluded to the fact that he's not going to take over this team at the end of the season after this season anyway. So maybe they'll just do it for him. He's alluded to the fact that he always has his teams fighting till the very end, and you just get that sense as well. So I think camaraderie's there. So for me, Roma. What about you, Rory?
I think Roma. I think Roma are going to get it done. I think Atalanta beating Monza 4-0 is not enough for me to think that Atalanta have turned a corner. I think they're going to come up against a decent side, and Roma are more than capable of doing it. Milan, as you said, we never know what team are going to turn up, but I would pretty much guarantee that they're not going to turn up at the Stadio Olimpico. I don't think the team have got it in them when they've not got much on the line. And then Torino away, I think those fixtures lie quite nicely for Roma, whereas Lazio, I feel like it's a little bit tougher, especially if Lecce have something to play for as well. Like, again, Lecce are one of those teams that they're never going to really give you an easy game. It's always going to be a bit rough. And as we've just talked about, Lazio, you never know what team are going to turn up either. And if they don't get two favourable results against Juve and Inter, then what team can turn up against Lecce? You know what I mean? So I think Roma should just get over the line. Or maybe it's just wishful thinking and we don't want Juve to be in Europe. I don't know. That could be it as well.
That's probably what it is.
Entirely.
Odd bias.
Entirely possible on this